I always thought HOA drama couldn't get worse than a few petty fines and angry emails, but I was wrong. One quiet Saturday morning, my wife ignored an HOA notice about a supposed landscaping violation, thinking it was just another empty threat. But just hours later, a furious HOA Karen showed up at our door, phone in hand, already calling the cops. What started as a simple disagreement over a $150 fine spiraled into a showdown we never expected, one that left even the responding officer frozen in shock when he realized exactly who he was talking to. To understand how we got here, you need to know the backstory. A few weeks earlier, my wife decided to plant a small flower garden in our front yard. Nothing outrageous, just some roses, lavender, and a few stepping stones to make it look welcoming. But apparently, the HOA had other plans. A letter showed up claiming the garden violated community aesthetics and demanded we remove it immediately or face a $150 fine. We thought it was ridiculous. Our yard looked better than half the houses on the block, and neighbors even complimented it. So, my wife ignored the notice, thinking it would all blow over. That's when Karen entered the picture. She wasn't just any HOA member, she was the self-proclaimed enforcer, the kind of person who believed the entire neighborhood should live under her rules. She would circle our house almost daily, snapping photos and muttering about regulations. One evening, I overheard her outside telling another board member that people like us were the reason property values were dropping. At first, I laughed it off, but her obsession was growing. 2 weeks later, we got another notice, this time marked final warning in big, bold letters. My wife read it, rolled her eyes, and tossed it straight into the trash. That's when Karen escalated. She came storming onto our driveway the next morning, screaming about how we were ruining the neighborhood. My wife tried to calmly explain that it was just a few flowers, but Karen wasn't having it. She whipped out her phone, saying she had no choice but to involve the authorities. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up to our house. 2 officers stepped out, looking confused but serious. Karen ran to them like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. "Arrest them," she shouted, pointing at my wife. The officers exchanged looks but didn't move. One of them walked over and asked for our side of the story. My wife calmly explained everything, even showing photos of the garden before and after. But just as the officer was about to respond, his partner glanced at the HOA paperwork Karen handed over, and his entire expression changed. He froze mid-sentence, staring at the name on the document. The moment the officer's eyes locked on the paperwork, everything changed. His confident, professional demeanor shifted into something else entirely. Confusion mixed with disbelief. He looked up slowly, staring at my wife, then back down at the HOA letter, as though trying to process what he was reading. Finally, he turned to his partner and whispered something I couldn't catch. The second officer's eyebrows shot up, and he stepped closer to take a look for himself. Karen, of course, mistook their hesitation for agreement with her. "See," she shouted, her voice cracking with self-righteous triumph. "They're breaking HOA rules, and they refuse to pay. I want them cited, fined, or removed if necessary." She crossed her arms, tapping her foot, practically vibrating with anticipation. But the officer didn't move toward us. Instead, he stepped back and asked Karen to stay quiet for a moment. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am, are you aware of who signed this property deed?" Karen blinked, thrown off for the first time all morning. "What does that have to do with anything?" she snapped. The officer sighed, clearly trying to stay composed. "Because according to the county records attached here, this property isn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. In fact, your entire HOA doesn't have legal authority over this lot." Silence. Karen's smug expression dissolved instantly, replaced by something between panic and confusion. That can't be right," she stammered, shaking her head. "This whole street is under HOA control." The officer raised an eyebrow and handed the paperwork back to her. "Not this one," he said firmly. It was exempted years ago by a court ruling. Whoever drafted your HOA documents missed it. Technically, these homeowners aren't bound by your rules, and they don't owe you a single cent in fines. You could have heard a pin drop. My wife and I just stood there, stunned, while Karen's face turned bright red. But she wasn't about to back down. "No," she shouted, her voice rising. "That can't be true. We'll take this to the board, we'll sue if we have to." The officer's partner finally spoke up, his voice calm but cold. "Ma'am, if you continue harassing these homeowners over fines you can't legally enforce, you could be the one facing charges." Karen froze, gripping her phone like it was her lifeline. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like her never walk away quietly. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. Karen would finally back off, accept her mistake, and move on. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOA Karens, it's that they don't surrender, they regroup. And sure enough, within 24 hours, she came back with a new plan, and this time, she wasn't coming alone. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. I pulled back the curtain and froze. There she was, standing in the middle of our driveway with 3 other HOA board members behind her, each holding clipboards like they were about to conduct some sort of official investigation. My wife sighed, already exhausted by the sight of them, and muttered, "Here we go again." I stepped outside and asked them what they thought they were doing on our property. Karen smirked, clearly regaining her confidence. "We're here to document all current violations," she announced. "Even if your lot isn't under HOA rules, your landscaping still impacts community property values, and we're prepared to file a civil complaint." Before I could respond, one of the board members started snapping photos of our yard, our driveway, even the side of the house. My wife demanded they leave immediately, but Karen held her ground. "We're within our rights," she said, smiling like a predator circling its prey. I knew we had to tread carefully. Technically, we weren't under HOA control, but if she fabricated enough complaints and filed them at the county level, she could drag us into court just to make our lives miserable. So, I calmly told her we'd let our attorney handle any further contact and went back inside. But that night, things escalated again. Around 10 p.m., we heard what sounded like footsteps near our front yard. I checked our security cameras, and there she was, Karen herself, sneaking along the edge of our property with a flashlight, pointing at the garden, the fence, and even our mailbox while speaking into her phone. It looked like she was recording evidence for some case she was building against us. The next morning, we received an email from her legal advisor, which, after some digging, turned out to be her cousin who'd taken 1 semester of community college law. The email threatened to sue us for damages to neighborhood harmony if we didn't remove the garden within 7 days. My wife laughed when she read it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was only getting started. And I was right. Because 2 days later, we got a certified letter summoning us to an emergency HOA board hearing. But when we arrived, someone else showed up who changed everything, someone Karen never expected to face. The emergency HOA hearing was held in the community clubhouse, and when my wife and I walked in, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen sat at the head of the long conference table, flanked by the other board members, wearing a smug smile like she'd already won. Stacks of printed evidence, photos of our garden, our mailbox, even screenshots of our social media, were piled in front of her like she was preparing for trial. We took our seats, but before the meeting could start, the door swung open, and in walked someone Karen hadn't expected, our attorney. But not just any attorney. My wife's older brother, James, happened to be a respected real estate lawyer who had spent 15 years specializing in HOA litigation. Karen's face drained of color the moment she recognized his name on his badge. The chairperson started reading off the charges, but James calmly interrupted. "Before this goes any further," he said, his voice steady but commanding, "let's establish something very clear. This property is legally exempt from HOA jurisdiction." He slid a stack of official county documents across the table. Your board's actions, including fines, harassment, and surveillance, are all unlawful. If they continue, we will pursue a restraining order and damages. You could practically hear the oxygen leave the room. Karen glanced around for support, but the other board members suddenly found the floor very interesting. One of them even whispered, "I told you this wasn't a good idea." Karen tried to recover, but James wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "Also, be advised that trespassing on my client's property, including photographing and recording them without consent, is a criminal offense. I have security footage documenting these incidents. Shall I play them now?" The silence was deafening. Karen's hands trembled as she shuffled her papers, realizing she was completely cornered. Finally, the chairperson cleared his throat and announced, "The board withdraws all fines and will update our records to reflect this property's exemption." But the real twist came next. James turned to Karen and handed her a letter. "This," he said, "is a cease and desist order filed this morning. Any further harassment will result in legal action against you personally." Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't say a word. For the first time, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA was speechless. We walked out of that clubhouse free, no fines, no restrictions, and no more HOA drama, at least for now. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that HOA nightmares never truly end. There's always another case, another Karen, another fight waiting to unfold. And if you've ever faced an HOA nightmare yourself, tell us your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Case Files for more shocking, unbelievable cases just like this one.